Former Marine completes unsupported Atlantic row. A former Royal Marine has successfully completed a row across the Atlantic Ocean. Dave Dinger Bell arrived in Newlyn in Cornwall at about 1300 British summertime on Sunday after 119 days alone at sea. His team believes he is one of the first people to successfully row unsupported from New York to continental Europe. Along the way he was stung by a jellyfish, hit by huge storms, and revealed he has a fear of open water. On arrival at Newlyn Harbour, Mr. Bell, from Beer Regis in Dorset, said, "I'm never doing anything dangerous ever again," and celebrated with a cup of coffee and plate of chicken and pasta. Due to changing weather conditions and incoming winds, he decided to make landfall at Newlyn, rather than Falmouth as planned. His final effort involved rowing non-stop for 40 hours after getting into challenging weather off the Isles of Scilly. He said, "I didn't want to finish in the Scillies, I wanted to make the mainland. It was a race against time." Organizers said it has been a nail-biting couple of days waiting for him to arrive, and he was met by an RNLI lifeboat who helped guide him in for the last 3 miles. BBC is not responsible for the content of external sites. View original tweet on Twitter. A number of people gathered to welcome him on shore, including his partner, brother and father. The expedition was self-funded, with funds raised going to 2 charities, the SBS Association and Rock 2 Recovery UK. House passes bill to avert shutdown and suspend debt limit. Though Senate passage is unlikely, CNN. The House of Representatives voted to pass legislation on Tuesday to prevent a government shutdown at the end of the month and suspend the nation's borrowing limit, setting up a showdown with Republicans who insist Democrats should act alone to stave off a looming debt crisis. The party line vote was 220 to 211. Government funding is set to expire on September 30. But the stopgap bill the House approved would extend funding and keep the government open through December 3. In addition, the measure includes a debt limit suspension through December 16, 2022. It would also provide $28.6 billion in disaster relief funding and $6.3 billion to assist Afghanistan evacuees. The bill now faces an uphill battle in the Senate. By attaching the debt limit suspension to the must-pass funding bill, Democrats are essentially daring Republicans to vote no and spark a shutdown. It's not yet clear what Democrats' Plan B would be if the effort to avert a shutdown and suspend the debt limit runs aground in the Senate, as it appears is on track to happen. If Senate Republicans block the stopgap funding measure over the debt limit, there could still be enough time to strip the debt limit measure out and pass a standalone spending bill to avoid a shutdown. But the vote would take place perilously close to the shutdown deadline and would likely require cooperation on both sides to process a quick Senate vote. It also would leave the debt ceiling problem unresolved, setting up yet another flashpoint issue to be dealt with by Congress in the weeks to come. Earlier on Tuesday, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer left the door open on what measures the House would take if the Senate is not able to pass what the House sends over before the government runs out of funding next week. "We want to send it over to the Senate and give the Senate an opportunity to consider it, figure out what they're going to do, and they may send it back to us, at which point in time we will have to make a determination. But we want to pass that bill," he said. Iron Dome funding sparks progressive outcry. The Democratic-controlled House had been expected to pass the government funding measure, but it faced a last-minute snag as a group of progressives have told leadership that they will not vote for the bill if it includes $1 billion in funding for Israel's Iron Dome. The provision has since been taken out of the bill to appease concerns from progressives. 2 sources involved in the process confirmed to CNN. The decision to remove the funding sparked pushback from other Democrats who opposed the move, however. Later on Tuesday, Hoyer said on the House floor that he will be bringing up a separate bill to provide funding for it later this week after it got taken out of the final version of the bill the House is voting Tuesday. Hoyer said he would bring up the separate bill under suspension, which means it would bypass the normal rules required to pass the bill and require a two-thirds majority to pass. Democrats want to address debt limit on bipartisan basis. Democrats insist that lawmakers must act on a bipartisan basis to address the debt limit, and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced on Monday that the issue would be paired with the must-pass funding bill. This week, the House of Representatives will pass legislation to fund the government through December of this year to avoid a needless government shutdown that would harm American families and our economic recovery before the September 30 deadline, the congressional Democratic leader said. The legislation to avoid a government shutdown will also include a suspension of the debt limit through December 2022 to once again meet our obligations and protect the full faith and credit of the United States. The clock is ticking to address the debt limit. Congress may only have until mid-October to act before the federal government can no longer pay its bills. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen called on Congress to raise the debt ceiling in a Wall Street Journal op-ed Sunday, warning that if the U.S. defaults on its debt, it could trigger a spike in interest rates, a steep drop in stock prices, and other financial turmoil. This story and headline has been updated with additional developments Tuesday. Correction. This story has been updated to correct Chuck Schumer's title. He is Senate Majority Leader. CNN's Kristen Wilson and Ryan Nobles contributed. People who eat more dairy fat have lower risk of heart disease. Study suggests, CNN, people with a higher consumption of dairy fat have a lower risk of cardiovascular disease than those with low intakes. According to new research studying some of the world's biggest consumers of dairy products. An international team of scientists studied the dairy fat consumption of 4,150 60-year-olds in Sweden, a country with one of the world's highest levels of dairy production and consumption, by measuring blood levels of a particular fatty acid that is mostly found in dairy foods. Experts then followed the cohort for an average of 16 years to observe how many had heart attacks, strokes, and other serious circulatory events, and how many of them died. After statistically adjusting for other known cardiovascular disease risk factors including age, income, lifestyle, dietary habits, and other diseases. Researchers found that those with high levels of the fatty acid, indicative of a high intake of dairy fats, had the lowest risk of cardiovascular disease, as well as no increased risk of death from all causes. The team then confirmed these findings in other populations after combining the Swedish results with 17 other studies involving a total of almost 43,000 people from the US, Denmark, and the UK. While the findings may be partly influenced by factors other than dairy fat, our study does not suggest any harm of dairy fat per se, Matti Markland, senior researcher at the George Institute for Global Health in Sydney and joint senior author of the paper, said in a statement. We found those with the highest levels actually had the lowest risk of CVD, cardiovascular disease. These relationships are highly interesting. But we need further studies to better understand the full health impact of dairy fats and dairy foods, he said. Lead author Kathy True, a researcher at the George Institute, said consumption of some dairy foods, especially fermented products, had previously been associated with benefits for the heart. Dairy products are rich in nutrients. Increasing evidence suggests that the health impact of dairy foods may be more dependent on the type, such as cheese, yogurt, milk, and butter, rather than the fat content, which has raised doubts if avoidance of dairy fats overall is beneficial for cardiovascular health, she said in the statement. Our study suggests that cutting down on dairy fat or avoiding dairy altogether might not be the best choice for heart health, she added. It is important to remember that although dairy foods can be rich in saturated fat, they are also rich in many other nutrients and can be a part of a healthy diet. However, other fats like those found in seafood, nuts, and non-tropical vegetable oils can have greater health benefits than dairy fats, True said. Brian Power, lecturer at the Department of Health and Nutritional Sciences at Ireland's Institute of Technology Sligo, said the study encourages us to rethink what we think we know about food and disease. Dairy products do not need to be avoided, Power, who was not involved in the study, told CNN in an email. This is largely lost in its translation when communicating what we know about healthy eating. Data suggest correlation rather than causal link. Alice Lichtenstein, director and senior scientist at Tufts University's Cardiovascular Nutrition Laboratory, told CNN that her biggest concern was that the study results could be interpreted to suggest that all full-fat dairy products will reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, adding, "The bulk of the data do not support consuming full-fat dairy products to reduce CVD risk." She said the study data showed that the group with the highest biomarker of dairy intake also had, among other things, a significantly lower BMI, were more physically active, had a lower smoking rate, lower rates of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, a higher level of education, higher intakes of vegetables, fruit and fish, and lower intake of processed meat. Hence, a higher diet quality, all factors associated with a lower risk of cardiovascular disease. They were controlled for in the statistical analyses, however, residual confounding cannot be ruled out. The data reported are for associations, however. Associations cannot establish causality, she told CNN in an email, adding that it was also noteworthy that the authors could not identify what type of dairy products their cohort consumed. The research was published in the journal PLOS Medicine. Why thousands of migrants, many from Haiti, are stuck at Texas-Mexico border. A mounting crisis is unfolding at the U.S.-Mexico border where thousands of migrants, many from Haiti, have trekked across dozens of countries, facing blistering heat and other dangers to seek refuge in the United States. But entering the land of the free has proved difficult after migrants waded across the border. They were met by Border Patrol agents and deportation efforts. All eyes are on the small town of Del Rio, Texas, where at one point more than 14,000 migrants, the majority from Haiti, were sheltering under a bridge. One of the migrants, Jean-Baptiste Wilvins, told ABC News he crossed 11 countries to get to the U.S. after he and his family had been living in Chile for the last 4 years. "I'm scared to go back there because right now I cannot live in my country," he said. His pregnant wife and 10-year-old daughter are now back on the Mexican side of the border. He said they had made it to the U.S. camp but called it hell. On the U.S. side, Wilvins said they were only given a burrito and a bottle of water per day, but in Mexico, several people came to the camp to give away food, which some migrants got into a fight over. The mayor of Del Rio, Bruno Lozano, called the scenes unfolding heartbreaking. "The fact that they're putting their lives at risk is telling of the situation that they come from," he said. More. Biden admin outlines response to surge of Haitian migrants at border. Like so many migrants who arrive at the U.S. southern border, the current wave has come from Central or South America. Many of them are Haitian refugees who left their country after the 2010 earthquake. For a variety of reasons, perhaps mostly economic, the economy suffered with COVID. "We have seen them migrate up over the last few months to our southern border," said Elizabeth Newman, a former Department of Homeland Security Assistant Secretary and ABC News contributor. Now, the world watches to see how the Biden administration handles the influx. For years after the 2010 earthquake, Haitians living inside the U.S. had been granted temporary protected status. The Trump administration let that designation expire. However, after the assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse in July and another devastating earthquake earlier in August, the Biden administration restored that special status to Haitians, while that TPS is only applicable for people that are already here in the United States. That might have given the Haitian community hope that if they somehow got into the United States, maybe they could take advantage of that TPS as well, Newman said. Some of the migrants have claimed asylum and are awaiting the immigration process inside the U.S., but many have already been loaded onto planes and deported back to Haiti. More. Haiti's interim prime minister declares he's in charge after president assassinated. State of siege declared. The Biden administration says 1 to 3 flights are leaving a day, removing migrants who do not have a valid claim to stay in the U.S. based on Title 42. A Trump-era law prohibiting migrants from seeking asylum in the U.S., citing COVID concerns. If you come to the United States illegally, you will be returned. Your journey will not succeed. And you will be endangering your life and your family's lives, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said in a Monday press conference. Title 42 is actually not immigration law as much as it is public health law that allows an emergency to be declared and basically the borders to be closed, Newman said. A year ago, you could definitely see the case. We did not have vaccines. We did not have a robust testing capability. We have those things now. However, unaccompanied minors and many families are exempt from Title 42. Still, migrant advocates like Guerline Joseph with the Haitian Bridge Alliance say that's not enough. Title 42 should not be used as a way to trap migrants. As a way to trap asylum seekers, she said. Why can't we make sure they are tested, they are vaccinated and provide them the access? Joseph said. On Capitol Hill, some lawmakers have called for the end of the use of Title 42. I urge President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas to immediately put a stop to these expulsions and to end this Title 42 policy at our southern border, Senator Chuck Schumer, DNY, said Tuesday on the Senate floor. Now, many migrants are living in fear of being sent back to Haiti after their exhaustive and perilous journeys. One migrant named Joseph, a social studies school teacher and father of 3 who didn't want to share his last name, told Nightline he crossed 10 countries to get to the U.S. to give his children the chance at a better life. When I saw that my child would not get the education that I wanted, I had to think that maybe the U.S., as a superpower, could give me some wisdom, and that my child could get social protection. A protection for education, Joseph said. More. Officials. Many Haitian migrants are being released in U.S. Wilvins compared how the U.S. has welcomed Afghan refugees, but is turning away Haitians. The U.S. gives nearly 30,000 Afghans the ability to be refugees in the U.S. but Haitians are deported. Why is that? Wilvin said. Newman said that, we have a debt that we owe the Afghan people, with the withdrawal of American troops in wake of the swift Taliban takeover and end of 10-year war in Afghanistan. There is a slightly different sentiment for those trying to reach us from the Southern Hemisphere. And I think that it's a good question for us to ask ourselves why, she said. Harrowing images from the border have emerged over the past week showing Border Patrol agents on horseback aggressively attempting to push back migrants as they cross the Rio Grande into the U.S. One image showed an agent on horseback grabbing a man by the back of his shirt. As I saw this image brought me back to slavery, Joseph with the Haitian Bridge Alliance said. Overcome with emotion. As a black woman, as a descendant of slaves, as a woman from Haiti whose forefathers and ancestors fought to end slavery, fought for freedom of all black people. It is painful because we keep on being reminded that our lives do not matter, our pain does not matter, she said. U.S. Border Patrol Chief Raul Ortiz initially defended the agents, saying, "We do not know who are the smugglers or who are the migrants. So it's important that the Border Patrol agents maintain a level of security." During a press conference Monday, Homeland Security later slammed the video as extremely troubling, saying a full investigation, which will be conducted swiftly, will define the appropriate disciplinary actions. President Joe Biden said he found the videos of tactics used by Border Patrol agents on horseback against Haitian migrants at the Texas border horrific and horrible, said White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. But Biden doubled down on the handling of the chaos at the border. "We will get it under control," he said when asked about the crisis by reporters at the United Nations headquarters Tuesday. Vice President Kamala Harris condemned the treatment of migrants at the border on Tuesday, saying, "Human beings should never be treated that way. I was deeply troubled by it." Meanwhile, the Del Rio mayor said of the images, "We don't know the situation that came out that caused that contrast to happen, but I can tell you what I've seen is. It's been a humanitarian effort of proportions that I've never seen in my life." The union representing Border Patrol agents defended the images, arguing that's part of their training. DHS says it now has agency monitors on the ground at the border to make sure policies are being followed. Texas Gov. Greg Abbott visited Del Rio Tuesday and asked the Biden administration for an emergency declaration. "These Border Patrol officers are overwhelmed with the amount of work they are ordered to do, and they're suffering the consequences of an administration that is not providing either the personnel or the resources they need," he said. Newman said she hopes the crisis will lead to public pressure on Congress to once and for all address things that we are now on 4 presidents that have been trying to address this. "We've got to fix it because the problem is just going to get worse," she said. "These are human beings that deserve to be treated better than we're capable of treating them today." More. Biden found images of border agents with migrants horrific and horrible. White House says Joseph with the Haitian Bridge Alliance said people are coming to the border as a last resort. "Because they are in need of protection, because they are dying, because they need support," she said. "Their desire for a better life often makes them vulnerable to smugglers and coyotes who have been known to charge migrants anywhere up to $15,000 per person to take them over the border," she said. "If those people haven't had an avenue to properly present themselves to want to seek asylum, there would be no need for them to be engaged with those coyotes. To be engaged with those human traffickers, frankly, to be engaged with people who do not have their best interests at heart," Joseph added. For families like those of Haitian schoolteacher Joseph, making this treacherous journey for a chance at a better life is one of the last options they have left. "I went through all these dangers with my family, my wife and my children. Because the United States, I think, it's the last journey for us to make our dreams come true," Joseph said. Bristol half-marathon winner disqualified after running wrong race. The winner of a half-marathon has been disqualified because he was only meant to run the distance of a 10K. The Bristol half-marathon, 21 kilometers, took place alongside the Bristol 10K in the Great Bristol Run on Sunday. Omar Ahmed had originally signed up to run the 10K but ended up accidentally running, and winning, the half-marathon in just 63 minutes. Mr. Ahmed went the wrong way when he reached the point where the course diverged for the 2 distances. The revised men's positions confirmed Chris Thompson, of Aldershot, Farnham and District Athletics Club, as the new winner with a time of 67 minutes. The Great Run Company said Mr. Ahmed, whose first name was spelt incorrectly on his race number, entered the 10K as an elite runner and not the half marathon. Therefore he was not officially part of the half marathon race, and would, unfortunately, be disqualified. It said while Mr. Ahmed had put in an impressive performance, it had received objections from other athletes and a subsequent investigation took place, resulting in the disqualification. Paul Foster, chief executive of the Great Run Company, added, "Rules are rules, and in this case they say we have to disqualify Omar. We salute his performance. And he has been invited to take part in next week's Great Manchester Run as an elite athlete. Of course. We also look forward to welcoming him back to Bristol for 2022's Great Bristol Run." The Bristol 10K is normally held in the spring and the half marathon at the end of the summer. But last year both races were cancelled because of COVID-19. In this year's events, runners took on various routes covering the city centre, Harbourside and Avon Gorge. North Dakota stuntman known as Flying Farmer crashes on Jump McCody, ND. The first car jumping attempt in 5 years by North Dakota's version of Evel Knievel ended in disaster when the car driven by the man known as the Flying Farmer corkscrewed off the ramp and rolled. Authorities said John Smith, 57, was alert after the crash Saturday at a rural gravel pit and that he even tried to pull himself out of the car while talking to rescuers. He was eventually cut out and taken by a medical helicopter to a hospital, according to firefighters. The extent of his injuries wasn't known. The crowd of about 300 spectators went silent when Smith crashed. Family members, including his daughters and wife of 34 years, Melinda, reacted emotionally, running to the mangled car. The Bismarck Tribune reported, Smith's previous jump was in 2016, when he rose over towering flames to clear a burning trailer. Smith, who farms near McCody in western North Dakota, said he was inspired by the motorcycle daredevil Knievel while growing up. He has gained notoriety for his jumps at fairs and other attractions across the state. He has performed more than 100 jumps, even jumping on a frozen lake. Newborn donkey rejected by mother moves into Skegness house. A newborn donkey rejected by its mother and a surrogate is being hand-reared at home by a human mom. 12-day-old Kai is being fed milk from bottles and wears a nappy while inside his new Lincolnshire house. Owner John Nuttall, whose family has run donkey rides on Skegness Beach for a century, said in his experience only about 5% of foals were rejected by their mother. "You've got to keep going and persevere with it to get him strong," he added. After Kai's mother was not interested in him, a second mare also refused to feed the unloved equine. In desperation, Mr. Nuttall began bottle feeding the dinky donkey but struggled until neighbor and dog expert Grazina Provinus offered her help. "She rang me one night to ask me how the foal was doing. I said, 'He's not very well, he's poorly.' She took the foal away that night about midnight. Stayed up literally the night and kept bottle feeding him," said Mr. Nuttall. "She put a nappy on him so he didn't mess in the house and kept him on his feet through the night. When Kai returned home to Mr. Nuttall, he refused to feed and just lay on the sofa. He said his neighbor took him back and he is now thriving." Ms. Provinus said it was a bit crazy, having a donkey around the house. Her teenage daughter has been helping with the hourly feeds, which continue through the night. "He feels at home," she said. "He has been very well behaved. He is cheeky. He likes to play but no damage." In a couple of months Kai will be weaned and is expected to join 70 other donkeys on the Nuttall's family farm. Ms. Provinus said the family would be sad to see him go, adding, "He doesn't leave our side. He loves to stay with a human, he loves to be by your side. Even if I do some weeding outside he follows me." Willie Garson, Sex and the City actor, dead at 57. CNN actor Willie Garson, known for his role on the Sex and the City series and films, has died, according to his son, Nathan Garson. He was 57. "I love you so much, Papa. Rest in peace, and I'm so glad you got to share all your adventures with me and were able to accomplish so much," his son wrote on Instagram. "I'm so proud of you." A HBO Max spokesperson also confirmed Garson's passing, and the network honored his contributions to one of its most iconic shows in a statement. Willie Garson was in life, as on screen, a devoted friend and a bright light for everyone in his universe, the statement read. He created one of the most beloved characters from the HBO pantheon and was a member of our family for nearly 25 years. We are deeply saddened to learn of his passing and extend our sincere condolences to his family and loved ones. On Sex and the City, Garson played Stanford Blatch, friend and confidant of protagonist Carrie Bradshaw, Sarah Jessica Parker. He appeared regularly in the series throughout its run and in both films. Willie Garson, Sarah Jessica Parker. Christian Davis, Kim Cattrall and Cynthia Nixon in Sex and the City. Garson, who was born in New Jersey, started training as an actor at age 13 and went on to study at Wesleyan University. According to a bio posted on the university's website, his first break in Hollywood was in guest roles on TV shows like Cheers and Family Ties. It was on television that Garson would go on to make a reputation for himself as a beloved character actor. In addition to his role in Sex and the City, he had recurring memorable parts on USA Network's White Collar, ABC's NYPD Blue, and CBS's Hawaii 5-0. He was most recently slated to appear in the reboot of the series, And Just Like That, which is set to premiere on HBO Max later this year. Garson was a proud parent of one child, his son Nathan. He was also an advocate for organizations that help children find homes through adoption. In January, Garson marked his son's adoption day in an Instagram post, saying, "Best day of my life. Always. It's an honor at n@n_Garson, today and every day. In the wake of his passing, Garson's many friends and former colleagues expressed their love for the actor. Mario Cantoni, who played Garson's on-screen husband in Sex and the City, called Garson a brilliant TV partner in a heartfelt post. "I'm devastated and just overwhelmed with sadness. Taken away from all of us way soon. You were a gift from the gods," he wrote. "Rest my sweet friend. I love you." Garson's friend, Modern Family actress Julie Bowen, wrote, "This breaks my heart. Willie Garson, a friend who loved me at my worst, and always let me know it, is gone. Goodbye, Fatty. I love you always." Actor Jim Beaver added, heartbroken at the death of Willie Garson. "A fine actor, devoted father, and acerbic, funny, gracious friend. Common painkiller should be investigated for possible risks to developing fetuses. Experts say." CNN, an international group of 13 scientists, has released a statement calling for the healthcare community to carefully consider the use of acetaminophen, APAP, during pregnancy until the painkiller is thoroughly investigated for any potential impact on fetal development in the womb. Outside the United States, acetaminophen is known as paracetamol. According to the statement published Thursday in the journal Nature Reviews Endocrinology. A growing body of research shows that prenatal exposure to APAP might alter fetal development, which could increase the risks of some neurodevelopmental, reproductive and urogenital disorders. The statement is not health guidance, but urges healthcare providers and regulators to take action. The authors are not recommending anything counter to what is already done by obstetrician-gynecologists when prescribing acetaminophen for a given clinical condition, said Dr. Christopher Zahn, Vice President of Practice Activities for the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, who was not involved in the statement. However, as always, any medication taken during pregnancy should be used only as needed, in moderation, and after the pregnant patient has consulted with their doctor, he added. Medically indicated, signed by 91 scientists from Australia, Brazil, Canada, Europe, Israel, Scotland, the UK and US. The consensus statement calls for pregnant women to be cautioned to forego use of acetaminophen during pregnancy, unless its use is medically indicated, even after getting approval from a physician. The statement said, women should minimize exposure by using the lowest effective dose for the shortest possible time. There are good medical reasons for pregnant women to use APAP. After consulting physicians or pharmacists, and that is for fever and severe pain, said David Christensen, an associate professor of cell biology and physiology at the University of Copenhagen and one of the 13 co-authors of the statement. High fever is a known risk for multiple fetal disorders, including neural tube defects and later life cardiovascular disorders, the statement noted. However, studies show only a third of pregnant women use acetaminophen to treat fever. The statement added, instead, headache, muscle pain, back pain and infection were the most common reasons for use. Data suggests more than 50% of women worldwide are using APAP during their pregnancies, Christensen said. Many of these women do not consider APAP as a true medication that can have potential side effects. It is those women who do not consider it as a true medication that we are trying to reach and want them to reflect a moment on their use, he added. Limited options acetaminophen has been the only pain reliever generally considered safe for use throughout pregnancy, which leaves mothers to be with few medical options if it is shown to be harmful to a fetus. Ibuprofen has already been linked with birth defects and damage to the baby's heart and blood vessels, while high doses of aspirin have been linked to bleeding in the brain and congenital defects, said pediatrician Drive. Leonardo Tresande, Director of Environmental Pediatrics at NYU Langone Health, who was not involved with the creation of the statement. Research on acetaminophen shows this is an emerging field of concern, Tresande said. I'm always going to say that further research is needed to understand the mechanisms and to control for other exposures. But the fact is there is substantial evidence to suggest that at the very least, this is a hazard for the fetus. Melissa Munoz, the Media Relations Director for Johnson & Johnson, told CNN in an email that, the label on our adult Tylenol products, in which acetaminophen is the active ingredient, states, if pregnant or breastfeeding, ask a health professional before use. The current evidence does not support a causal link between acetaminophen use during pregnancy and the risk of adverse neurological, urogenital and reproductive outcomes. Consumers who have medical concerns or questions about acetaminophen should contact their healthcare professional. In their analysis of existing research on acetaminophen, the authors of the statement found that short-term use, 2 weeks or less, carried the least risk. It is among the women reporting use for a longer duration, about 2 weeks or over 2 weeks during pregnancy, that's where the strongest associations are, Christensen said. Those results suggest that, short-term use may be less of a risk, which gives healthcare providers and pregnant women some reassuring leeway for the occasional use of APAP, said Jane Houlihan, Research Director for Healthy Babies Bright Futures, an alliance of nonprofit organizations which tracks babies' exposures to toxic chemicals that harm brain development. Reproductive and neurological impact scientists have been studying the potential impact of acetaminophen on the developing fetus for some time. One reason is a similarity between APAP and a group of synthetic chemicals called phthalate, which are found in hundreds of auto, home, food and personal care items. Acetaminophen's chemical structure and the way it breaks down seems to have a similar backbone to phthalate, said NYU's Tresande, who researches the impact of chemicals on babies. In their analysis of the studies, lab studies, animal research and 29 studies of acetaminophen use in 220,000 mother and child pairs have been done. The statement said, including 2 studies that found acetaminophen in cord blood and meconium, the baby's first stool. There is now a significant body of evidence that suggests that APAP disrupts the reproductive development of animals and humans, said co-author Shanna Swan, a professor of environmental medicine and public health at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York. There's enough evidence to find increased risk of undescended testicles and a shortening of the oniogenital distance, which is a predictive of later decreased sperm count and decreased fertility, Swan said. We also see impaired ovarian function, which has consequences for later fertility. Although females have been less studied, 26 of the mother and child studies found a link between acetaminophen exposure during pregnancy and neurodevelopmental outcomes, the statement noted. The identified disorders were primarily attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, and related ADHD behavior abnormalities that also include autism spectrum disorder, language delays, decreased IQ and conduct disorders, said co-author Ann Bauer, a postdoctoral fellow and researcher at the Center for Autism Research and Education at UMass Lowell. Research needed. ACOG's Zan disagreed with the statement's conclusions. This consensus statement, and studies that have been conducted in the past, show no clear evidence that proves a direct relationship between the prudent use of acetaminophen during any trimester and fetal developmental issues, ACOG's Zan said. Neurodevelopmental disorders, in particular, are multifactorial and very difficult to associate with a singular cause, Zan continued. The brain does not stop developing until at least 15 months of age. which leaves room for children to be exposed to a number of factors that could potentially lead to these issues. There are many areas that need further study, according to the statement. Which is why the group is calling for a massive research effort, while at the same time cautioning pregnant women against using acetaminophen without medical supervision. The ideal human study has not been done, Swan said, adding that more objective measures of when during pregnancy and how long a baby was exposed are needed. And then we have to follow these children, and look not only at their general development at birth and 1 year of age, but also how was their neurodevelopment over time. Then I think we'd clear up a lot of these uncertainties. Barbers in Afghanistan's Helmand province are now prohibited from shaving beards and playing music. CNN. Barbers in Afghanistan's Helmand province are now prohibited from shaving men's beards and playing music in their shops, according to a statement issued by the province's Taliban-led Department of Virtue and Vice. The new regulations mark the latest in a series of restrictions placed on the people of Afghanistan based on the Taliban's strict interpretation of Islamic Sharia law. You are urgently informed that from today, shaving beards and playing music in barbershops and public baths are strictly prohibited, the local authority said Sunday in a statement. If any barbershop or public bath is found to have shaved anyone's beard or played music, they will be dealt with according to the Sharia principles and they will not have the right to complain, the statement added. While the Taliban have said their rule would be milder than it was during their previous time in government. There have been numerous reports of harsh crackdowns since they seized power of the nation in August, including the detention and assault of journalists, the use of whips against women taking part in protests, and the public hanging of alleged criminals. The group also has not allowed Afghan girls and women to resume secondary education, despite promising that female students would be allowed to study. Afghan boys have already been called to return to school. When last in power between 1996 and 2001, the Taliban banned women and girls from education and work, and severely restricted their rights. Today, women have been completely excluded from the country's new hardline government and in some instances been ordered to leave their workplaces. State AGs are stepping into the police reform business to hold officers accountable, CNN. In the past month, attorneys general in 3 states have sought a court-ordered overhaul of local police departments, increasingly filling the role the federal government has played for decades of holding accountable police departments that are deemed to be behaving badly. State officials have been initiating investigations into local police departments, recognizing that the federal government can't take on every case nationwide. Their move into this area of police reform is in part filling a gap created by the Trump administration, which all but stopped opening pattern or practice investigations into local police departments. While these investigations are regarded as even more important amid heightened public scrutiny of law enforcement, there is disagreement on whether federal involvement in local policing leads to tangible reform, experts say. Just as the Justice Department has learned and is still learning how to use this tool effectively. I have no doubt that states will face the same challenges and I think they will be able to learn to some extent from what the feds have done, said Christy Lopez, a Georgetown University law professor who led the Justice Department's investigation of the Chicago Police Department. In Illinois, Attorney General Kwame Raoul announced an investigation into the Joliet Police Department in September after an in-custody death and its potential cover-up was documented by USA Today. In California, Attorney General Rob Bonta announced an agreement in August with the city of Bakersfield to overhaul its police department after an investigation initiated by the Justice Department in 2016. In Colorado, The state's Attorney General last week released the findings of an investigation that his office began last year after the death of Elijah McClain at the hands of Aurora police officers and paramedics in Illinois and Colorado. State legislatures only recently gave the attorneys general the authority to investigate local police departments. We started this investigation under the prior, presidential, administration. And they had a categorical policy of not conducting these investigations, said Colorado Attorney General Philip Weiser. They were trying to dismantle existing consent decrees and not conducting new pattern and practice investigations. When we started this in the summer of 2020, a federal investigation wasn't an option. The only option was to use our authority. Scrutinies on law enforcement in more ways. Consent decrees are an uncommon tool of last resort used by the Department of Justice to reform hesitant police departments. First by investigating how they work and then using the findings of the investigation to force their city or county government into an agreement to change. The Department of Justice has done a few dozen of these investigations in the last 2 decades, after Congress gave it that authority in 1994. Generally speaking, the department is supportive of state attorneys general exercising their authority to address systemic problems in local police departments, a DOJ official told CNN. During the 4 years of the Trump administration, the DOJ conducted one investigation into one unit of one police department. The DOJ, under President Joe Biden, has announced investigations into the Minneapolis, Louisville, and Phoenix police departments. Still, together, experts say, they represent a tiny fraction of the thousands of police departments that exist as parts of local, county, and state governments across the country. Already in the Biden administration you've got Minneapolis, Louisville, Phoenix. Out of 18,000 police departments. That's a drop in the bucket, said Chuck Wexler, executive director of the Police Executive Research Forum, PERF, a national police research and policy organization that advises police leaders on best practices. I think what you're seeing is division of labor. Some attorney generals are stepping into the police reform business. State attorneys general investigating police departments is just one of the many ways that scrutiny is being put on law enforcement in the post-George Floyd era. On Wednesday, a group of former and current black women officers filed a class action lawsuit against the Washington, D.C. police claiming racial and sexual discrimination, a hostile workplace and a culture of intimidation. The 10 women say that while on the job at the Metropolitan Police Department, MPD, they were treated with contempt and subjected to a male-dominated culture of race and sex discrimination, and intense pervasive retaliation, when they complained about it, according to the lawsuit. On the federal level, however, bipartisan talks around overhauling policing laws ended without a deal earlier this week. 6 months of negotiations were stalled due to several key sticking points, including qualified immunity, a controversial federal doctrine established by case law that can shield officers and other government employees from civil liability. State AGs launch probes into police departments targeted by investigations launched by attorneys general are typically in large cities and often follow scandals or high-profile deaths of people in police custody. It's common for investigators to find problems with training, supervision, or policies. After the investigation, there's typically an agreement negotiated between the municipality that oversees the police department and the Department of Justice. That agreement is known as a consent decree. And there's usually a lawyer or law firm paid by the city to make sure the department implements reforms as outlined in the agreement. Not every state gives its attorney general authority to initiate investigations, and in some states, attorneys have sought court-ordered reform of departments through lawsuits. In recent years, at least 3 state attorneys general have initiated investigations. Illinois and Colorado each gave their attorneys general the authority to investigate local police departments for problematic patterns. And California's Attorney General has had that authority for years. In 2016, Vice President Kamala Harris, who at the time was the Attorney General of California, started an investigation into the Bakersfield Police Department and the Kern County Sheriff's Office. The police department agreed to some changes last month, including changes to the way officers use and document force and the way supervisors review force. It was a comprehensive investigation, collaborative one. As they reviewed all of the uses of force, all the officer-involved shootings, citations, just a host of documents over a period of years, said Greg Terry, chief of the Bakersfield Police Department. Almost immediately we became proactive in seeking outside policy consultants to look at use of force policies. Increased level of training and supervision and oversight of officers. A spokesperson for the union representing rank-and-file Bakersfield police officers didn't respond to a request for comment. Weiser, a special prosecutor appointed by Colorado Governor Jared Polis last year, released the findings of a year-long investigation into the Aurora Police Department last week. The investigation was launched after the death of McLean, a 23-year-old black man who was stopped by police while walking home from a store, placed in a carotid hold and then injected with ketamine. According to the investigation's findings, the agency has a pattern and practice of racially biased policing, using excessive force, and failing to record required information when it interacts with the community, the report states. Weiser will seek a federal consent decree that will require specific changes and ongoing independent oversight, his office announced. A spokesperson for the Aurora Police Department declined to make the chief or other member of the command staff available for comment. The trouble with consent decrees. Illinois Attorney General Raoul announced an investigation into the Joliet Police Department after a USA Today report documented officers who had taken custody of an arrestee who swallowed drugs. The conduct of the arresting officers, and an allegation of retaliation against a sergeant who provided information about the case to the media without his department's permission. After receiving the request from Joliet's mayor and city officials, my office began a preliminary review of Joliet Police Department records and other information, Raoul said. It is clear that a formal investigation is needed to look at whether the department has engaged in patterns or practices of unlawful or unconstitutional policing. Raoul said that in the coming weeks, his office will conduct a thorough, impartial and independent review of whether reforms are needed under the law. Spokespersons for the Joliet Police Department and the union representing rank-and-file officers didn't respond to a request for comment. But consent decrees and federal involvement in local policing isn't universally accepted as a good thing, or that it even leads to reform. Peter Moskos, a former police officer and now a professor at John Jay College in New York, said the investigation in Baltimore was horrible, and designed to justify federal oversight. The Justice Department revealed a pattern or practice of constitutional violations, including excessive force and racially biased arrests. The probe ultimately led to the implementation of a federal consent decree in 2017 mandating systemic reform. It's not a real report. It's just checking boxes to show systemic patterns of abuses to be able to implement a consent decree. In theory, I'm not against them, I just haven't seen them working. Then you can't get out from under them, he said. Moskos also noted that consent decrees deal primarily with the department, but not crime. Lopez of Georgetown University, who was a longtime Civil Rights Division career attorney with the Justice Department, said the Baltimore investigation was comprehensive, involving numerous interviews, reviewing thousands of documents, and analyzing data to determine a pattern or practice of unconstitutional conduct. We really need to get better at how we measure the impacts of consent decrees, Lopez added. From what we can tell, it takes years for the full impacts to be felt, but there are some indications that you start to feel the impacts earlier than that, Lopez said. You have to have best practices. The investigation into the Aurora Police Department found that Aurora does not create and oversee appropriate expectations for responsible behavior, which leads to the use of excessive force and the violation of the civil rights of its residents, according to a press release from the Attorney General, announcing the findings. A spokesperson for the union representing rank-and-file officers did not respond to a request for comment. Like federal investigations, Weiser said the Colorado investigation ended with an outside entity monitoring an agreement between the state and the city of Aurora. Weiser said the goal of the investigation was to look at the global picture of the department, and not bring criminal prosecutions against individual officers. Excessive and unnecessary force can happen when situations could have been handled in cooler manner but is unnecessarily and unduly escalated. One way it happens. Someone shows up and the way they present is in a way that raises the temperature, he said. This situation could have involved no force but ends up involving significant force. That's unnecessary. Excessive. Lots of situations weren't criminal, just problematic policing. Wexler of PERF said it's important that everyone involved should know what's expected of everyone else. And there needs to be some way to hold everyone to expectations. What we've learned from the last 25 years, there needs to be accountability. In terms of process and outcomes and expectations. At the federal level, that's been a source of some concern, Wexler said. I'm talking about everyone. Whether the Department of Justice, the monitor, the federal judge. There's lots of people involved. The process has to be understood. It has to be fixed in terms of when it can be evaluated. Wexler said that the lack of a single national standard for anything related to policing creates issues for police departments which are often required to implement some change to their policies and conduct as a result of the investigations. There are no national guidelines. If you're talking about traffic stops, early warning systems, de-escalation, dealing with mental health issues, dealing with the homeless, you have to have best practices, he said. There are no national guidelines. It becomes an issue. January 6 committee issues first subpoenas for witness testimony to 4 Trump loyalists, CNN. The Select Committee investigating the January 6 riot at the U.S. Capitol issued its first round of subpoenas Thursday, targeting close aides and allies of former President Donald Trump. The subpoenas come as the Select Committee seeks to investigate efforts the Trump White House took to potentially overturn the 2020 presidential election and how the spread of misinformation fueled the anger and violence that led to the Capitol insurrection. The 4 subpoenas are going to former Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, former Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino, former advisor Steve Bannon and Kash Patel, a former Chief of Staff to then Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller who had also served as an aide to Republican Representative Devin Nunes. The former Trump staffers are being issued subpoenas for private depositions and records. All document requests are due by October 7. The committee requests that Patel and Bannon appear on October 14, while Scavino and Meadows have been requested to appear before the committee on October 15. CNN has reached out to Meadows, Scavino, Bannon and Patel for comment. The decision to call a group of Trump loyalists in front of the committee at this early stage demonstrates the direction of their investigatory process. The committee members have said they are very interested in what information was known within Trump's orbit about the planning leading up to the insurrection and decisions made that day. The Select Committee is investigating the facts, circumstances, and causes of the January 6 attack and issues relating to the peaceful transfer of power. In order to identify and evaluate lessons learned and to recommend to the House and its relevant committees corrective laws, policies, procedures, rules, or regulations, House Select Chairman Benny Thompson, a Mississippi Democrat, said in a statement. All four of the former Trump staffers were part of a larger records request the committee had sent to government agencies last month when it requested the records of hundreds of former Trump staffers, campaign employees and supporters who played a role in either spreading misinformation around the 2020 election results or the planning of the "Stop the Steal" rally that served as a prelude to the riot at the Capitol, as well as those who played a role in the security response that day. The National Archives, which serves as the custodian of the Trump administration White House records, told CNN earlier Thursday that it had no comment on whether it had been contacted by members of Trump's orbit or the White House regarding executive privilege. "We have no comment, since we consider the entire PRA notification process to be deliberative until a final decision is made," a spokesperson told CNN. The subpoenas to the four Trump loyalists underscore an effort by the committee to understand what the former president knew in the lead-up to January 6 and in its direct aftermath, based on those who were closest to him in that period of time. The information the committee is seeking also points to a clear interest in learning more about what Trump and those around him attempted to do to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. In the letter to Steve Bannon, the committee cites communications he had with Trump on December 30, 2020, and potentially other occasions, in which Bannon reportedly urged the former president to plan for and focus his efforts on January 6. The committee also references Bannon's incendiary comments made on his podcast on January 5, in which he said, "All hell is going to break loose tomorrow." To Meadows, the committee wrote, "The investigation has revealed credible evidence of your involvement in events within the scope of the Select Committee's inquiry, citing his close proximity to Trump on the day of the attack." The committee also said it is pressing to learn more about Meadows' efforts to aid in overturning the 2020 presidential election, and noted it has evidence that shows Meadows communicated with the highest officials at the Department of Justice requesting investigations into election fraud matters in several states, citing documents it has received from DOJ. The committee, citing documents it has obtained, told Patel, "There is substantial reason to believe that he has important insight and information into how the Department of Defense and White House prepared for and responded to the attack at the U.S. Capitol." The committee also said it wants to learn more about the direct communication Patel had with Meadows on the day of the insurrection. In its letter to Scavino, the committee said it has reason to believe that you have information relevant to understanding important activities that led to and informed the events at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, and relevant to former President Trump's activities and communications in the period leading up to and on January 6. The committee also cites Scavino's long history of working for Trump as key to providing important insight into how the former president handled the January 6 insurrection and efforts to overturn the election. The committee also cited an example of Scavino's tweets that indicated he encouraged participants to be a part of history on the day of the riot. Republican Representative Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, one of two Republicans serving on the committee, tweeted after the subpoenas were delivered that he is looking forward to getting a full accounting of everything that happened in the Trump White House on, before, and after January 6. "And we're just getting started," he added. This story has been updated with additional developments Thursday. CNN's Zachary Cohen contributed to this report. Rare Irrawaddy dolphins found in Indonesian waters, 10 pics, back in 2012, and for the first time, Irrawaddy dolphins were spotted in West Kalimantan, a part of Indonesian Borneo which is well known for its rich wildlife and dense tropical forests, also known as Orcaella brevirostris. The rare dolphins were found during a study in by WWF Indonesia and the Regional Office for Marine, Coastal and Resources Management Pontianak, BPSPL. The presence of Irrawaddy dolphins in West Kalimantan waters was previously unknown. So we are excited with the results of this preliminary study and hope this will help reveal information on the population and distribution of this unique species. A group of humpback dolphins was also encountered by the team, which strongly evidences how rich the biodiversity of the Kalimantan waters are. The results of this study indicate the importance of protecting the dolphins' habitat. From the origins of the rivers in the heart of Borneo to the lower rivers of the island, including waterways of Batu Ampere mangroves and nipa forests, the narrow straits and the coastal areas of Kubu Raya, West Kalimantan. Globally, there are around 6,000 Irrawaddy dolphins, with the majority in the coastal waters of Bangladesh. The remaining population is scattered throughout Southeast Asia and can be found in Thailand, Cambodia, Indonesia, the Philippines and the northeastern coast of Australia. Irrawaddy dolphins are classified as vulnerable by the IUCN, but in some areas, including the Mekong River, the Ayawardi River, and the Mahakam River in East Kalimantan, the species is listed as critically endangered. White House moving to release information on Trump to congressional investigators, CNN. The White House is taking steps to release information to a congressional committee investigating the January 6 attack on the Capitol about what former President Donald Trump and his aides were doing as violence erupted that day. A decision that is likely to set up a legal fight with the former president and raise questions of executive privilege for anyone who serves in the Oval Office. As President Biden has said, the events of January 6 were a dark stain on our country's history, and they represented an attack on the foundations of our Constitution and democracy in a way that few other events have, White House spokesman Michael Gwynn said in a statement to CNN. The president is deeply committed to ensuring that something like that can never happen again, and he supports a thorough investigation into what occurred, Gwynn said. That's why his administration has been engaging with Congress on matters relating to January 6 for several months now and will continue to do so, including with the Select Committee. Late last month, Trump threatened to invoke executive privilege in an effort to block the House Select Committee investigating the Capitol riot from obtaining a massive tranche of documents it's demanding from several U.S. government agencies, despite his successor having the ultimate say over whether the information can be shared. The House Select Committee has launched a sweeping investigation into January 6. As part of that, the panel has sent requests for information from a number of federal agencies, including the National Archives, the custodian of the Trump administration White House records. The committee asked for all documents and communications within the White House on that day, including call logs, schedules and meetings with top officials and outside advisors, including Rudy Giuliani. The Biden White House is inclined to limit how much it asserts executive privilege in that investigation, according to sources familiar with the administration's thinking. Such a stance eases the way for House investigators to get access to a trove of documents and to seek testimony from top White House officials from the previous administration. But any decision from the Biden White House could still run into legal challenges from Trump and members of his administration whose testimony is likely to be sought, possibly delaying any access by investigators. Biden has the ultimate say on whether executive privilege can be waived, but in many ways, this is new legal territory. in anticipation of subpoenas from the Select Committee. White House and Justice Department lawyers have been meeting to outline where the Biden administration will draw the line on executive privilege. It's a thorny issue because the decision could set a new precedent for future presidents and their administrations, potentially giving a future GOP-controlled Congress access to materials from a Democrat-led executive branch. An early indication of the Biden administration's thinking emerged in recent months in letters allowing former Trump officials to provide testimony to other congressional committees investigating the January 6 attack. The extraordinary events in this matter constitute exceptional circumstances warranting an accommodation to Congress, administration lawyers wrote in a letter in July to former Justice Department officials. Several former Trump Justice Department officials did provide interviews to Congress on their communications with the former president in the weeks before January 6, breaking with general practice to shield those internal deliberations. The letters to former justice officials read in part, President Biden has decided that it would not be appropriate to assert executive privilege with respect to communications with former President Trump and his advisors and staff, related to the post-election day efforts by the former president to overturn the election results.